everyone, welcome to the APPIC Video Series. Today I have three guests who are all doctoral candidates in school psychology programs, and they've all just finished the APPIC process and are transitioning into their internships. So I want to have them introduce themselves to you now.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Campbell, and I'm a fifth year, transitioning to my sixth year, doctoral candidate at UW-Madison. And my internship will be at the East Family Guidance Center in Hilo, Hawaii. It's a community mental health center.
Hi, this is Dieu. I'm also similar to all my colleagues here. I am transitioning to my sixth year and starting internship very soon with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We'll be at the autism track. Yes, and I also from the University of Houston in the school psych program.
Yes, so all of us are in sort of the same timeline. My name is Adrianna Crossing, and I am a rising sixth year doctoral candidate in the PhD school psych program there. And I will soon be starting my internship at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School in the child clinical track.
So the three of them are going to be sharing their experiences going through the APPIC process to kind of help demystify that experience for future applicants. Okay, so the first video is going to be about preparing for APPIC and what that might entail. So since the three of you have already gone through that process, I just wanted to start and ask what kind of sites students can usually expect to find within the APPIC process.
It can be a little overwhelming because there's all these new words and no one really necessarily explains what those are to you, but that's what we're here for. So the first type, and this is actually what my site is part of a consortium. And so there are several consortiums throughout the country. So the purpose of a consortium is to be able to share resources and create a more well-rounded training program, but have all these independent agencies that are providing internships. And so that looks different in every consortium. Some of them have didactic trainings with everyone across it, like mine will be. Others have kind of a unified application process and then do their own thing. They're all kind of unique, but it's a good way to actually, in the application process, save some money if you're applying to consortium, because you can apply to multiple sites with only paying one fee for that overall application. Another type of site that also applies to me, I guess, is the community mental health setting. So this is what it sounds like. It's providing services to families, individuals, kids within the community. And some of those are supported by the state. Some of them are independent. There's a big range of what those look like within themselves. But if you've done a practicum within some kind of like public community setting, it's probably going to be not too dissimilar from that.
All right, so I can speak to a couple of other types of sites. So Dieu and I both matched at hospital settings, which is really exciting, especially for two school psych students. We don't have the same access to practica at hospitals and academic medical centers that like clinical programs might have and even counseling programs might have. So basically what I'm telling you is just because you don't have a hospital-based experience doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. So I applied to tons of hospitals and I got 5 interviews at hospital-based sites and academic medical centers. And when you're looking at hospital sites, you want to keep a lookout for if it's going to be mostly inpatient, mostly outpatient, or a blend of the two. So in my work, I'm doing mostly outpatient work, but I have one rotation that's 4 hours per week that's going to be inpatient. So that's sort of one type of site. Another is counseling and psychiatric services centers at universities, also known as CAPS. I know of a student who was in a school and clinical combined program who was really aiming herself at CAP sites, but those sites are also highly sought after by counseling students and other clinical students. So if you are a school psych student, you really like working with adolescents or transition, that could be an option for you. Schools, obviously, as 3 school psych students, is a really, really big pull for us. Those are the ones where, I think I was probably the most competitive because we know what that looks like, right? We know what a school psychologist doing counseling looks like. We know what an IEP is. We know how to do evaluations and functional behavior analysis and assessments and things like that. And so that is, but if you're a clinical or counseling student and you really love working with kids and maybe you got a chance to do a school-based practicum, you can also apply to schools. That's the cool thing about all 3 fields, being able to go for all of the internships, is you can really aim yourself exactly where you want to be. The next type of site I'm going to talk about is juvenile justice. There are a couple of consortia around the country that have juvenile justice rotations. It's really great, and it just really focuses on juvenile justice, which if you're really focused on trauma-informed services, that is a population that has a great deal of trauma, and so that's a really great place to go. And lastly is sort of a type of hospital, which is Veterans Affairs Medical Centers. You'll see a lot of neuropsych specific training there, and it's usually adults, like almost entirely adults, but sometimes there will be some family work attached to the VA. And so, yeah, that's a great site for if you're really focused on adults in your training. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are all the types of sites that we considered in our APPIC journey.
I should add one thing about consortium because Adrianna's descriptions were very good. So in consortia sites, they're all different in kind of the makeup between them. So some of them might be mostly focused on schools, like be a bunch of different school systems, like the one in Illinois, the ISPIC has a ton of different school options and some other things. Others will have a bigger variety. Like at my consortium, some are juvenile justice, some are community mental health, some are school settings. And so it really just depends on each one. And I really recommend looking at the jobs within those, because sometimes you might miss a cool opportunity because you see the title and you're like, oh, I don't really feel like VA something something is for me. It's actually like a VA combined with a school of education thing where they actually have like school-based work. So really recommend looking at the details of what makes up a consortium.
Thank you for sharing your insight on different types of internship sites. But when you're looking at these different programs, what are some of the aspects that you should consider when you're looking at them?
There is a lot to think about, and Adrianna will say more about her process and our shared process and how to do that. But one thing to start is, where do you look for this information? So I will say, and you might know this for your grad school and college application process, not every site's materials are created equally. And so I would recommend definitely starting with the APPIC directory if you're going the APPIC route. So this is a huge document with all the APPIC sites ever, where you can actually do some filters and download spreadsheets of different filtered searches, which I found really helpful, just so I could eliminate like I know I wasn't going to apply to a VA site. So like I didn't want to search for that. So some places will provide brochures online that you can look at, and some of them will be extremely detailed and others will have 3 paragraphs. And so what I found really helpful to look, especially once you get to your kind of like top 20 sites or something you're trying to narrow it down, is to look for the program handbook. And I think you actually get a pretty good idea of the experiences and the things that are expected of you if they have their program handbook, and they often do, available online. But beyond just content you can find through the websites and Google searching furiously and stalking people on Facebook or whatever it is, I really recommend talking to someone at that site if you can. So either reach out, they often have like a student who's going to be willing to answer some questions or chat with you before you even apply, or if other people in your program or other students you know have applied to that site, really good information to get from them. What did they think of the site? People you trust and have things in common with, they can tell you a lot about, especially if your program's been applying to APPIC for a long time, kind of what the vibe is, and help you narrow down your decisions before you get committed to applying.
Another thing that you should consider is looking at sites that you might be interested in well ahead of time. So a year to 3 out from the actual fall you're going to be applying to APPIC, and then tailoring your experiences to what those sites might look for. So my example is when I was a second year, I started looking at the best children's hospitals in the country. And I saw that CHOP, which is where Dieu matched, yay Dieu. We both interviewed, but it was my dream site for years. And I remember looking at their like internship materials when I was in my second year, knowing that I was going to be applying in my 4th and 5th. And I saw that they want a lot of intervention hours. They want to see, a variety of different experiences. And I thought to myself, I'm going to aim there. I'm going to aim really high. I'm going to aim for one of the best pediatric hospitals in the world. And what that led me to do is seek out a lot of different additional experiences outside of the school setting. And I also knew that Philly is a very diverse city. And so I was always reaching to work with different types of just different demographic groups. I know that, in Michigan State, we're in the middle of Michigan, and it's a pretty middle class to sort of middle to lower socioeconomic bracket, but mostly white. And so knowing that I wasn't going to get the most diverse experiences in the schools, I really sought out some other things. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And the last piece about tailoring your experiences that I'll mention is in my program, you're allowed to kind of go wherever you want for your very last practicum year. And I knew that I really wanted to shoot for a hospital. And I knew that I'd be competing with clinical students. I know that clinical students have a little bit more neuropsych exposure than we have in my program. So I took an elective in neuropsych assessment and sought out an advanced practicum that offered me those types of experiences. And that made me more competitive for the sites that I ended up interviewing for. And in fact, my internship is 50% outpatient neuropsych assessment, 50% therapy. And so if I hadn't been aiming myself, I might not have matched at MGH, which is my top choice. Very exciting. And just to speak a little bit more about the additional clinical experiences that I sought, it's not just things offered through your program. So I did a summer camp that had therapy components. I did a group therapy for preschoolers through the Department of Psychology at my university, even though I was in the College of Education. And so look beyond the boundaries of just what your program offers, but make sure to check in with your advisor because it's really easy to get overextended, which I was the entire time I was in graduate school.
Yes, I just want to add on to what Adrianna is saying. It's so important to always think about like beyond what our programs get to offer us. So then similar to me, my goals were really having opportunity being a places that can like serve the Asian American populations as well as Asian and international populations. And even though I'm coming from the city of Houston, knowing to be very diverse, it's still that, you know, the connection from the program with the nearby communities have not been the strongest. So I'm constantly seeking those out, whether within the local communities with Houston, as well as like nationally, as well as internationally. So just constantly, my advice for, you know, whoever of us who are trying to apply or thinking about applying in a few years, just always thinking about what you want to do when you are done with your PhD. Don't just look within the time that you are at your program. Sure, you know, there are many things, we're very busy. Sometimes you can get very stressed out by what you're asked to do within that year, but constantly thinking about what you want to do with that PhD when you are done. And that would be your guiding compass about what and where you want to apply yourself in terms of internship as well as postdoc. I may be jumping out ahead of time, but when internship comes, a lot of places, they want to know what you plan for your long-term goal, like your lifelong career. So when you start thinking early, you already have that narrative in your mind. And when you start writing, getting ready for your application and whatnot, interviews even, you already have that narrative in you. It's been playing so much in your mind. It's become so natural to come out. It's so very authentic to come out as well. But I want to say a little bit about a program evaluation. It's so interesting because Adrianna has so many hours and she didn't know that she can count those under intervention.
I had no idea that program evaluation, particularly if it's done under a licensed psychologist, can count towards APPIC. It's something you'll need to discuss with your director of clinical training. But I had hundreds and hundreds of hours, and Dieu's the one that told me that that's a psychological service that is valuable.
Yeah, so I want to really highlight what you just said earlier. It has to be done with the supervision of a licensed psychologist, right? So then now, a licensed psychologist doesn't have to be a school site. It could be, you know, like any of the clinical and counseling and whatnot, but it has to be a licensed psychologist. And for those hours to be count, you know, towards your hours for internship, you want to make sure that your DCT, your director of clinical training, knows about that and approved it by paper, some sort of paperwork, like sign it and whatnot, so that your hours can be counted, right? So then make sure you talk to your advisor and your DCT about that to make sure before you jump right in and do all these hours and then cannot be counted for. And kind of along with that, program evaluation, you know, that's it's under outcome evaluation in time to track for sure. Yeah, you can look at that. It's like the first was outcome. It's so important for that to be highlighted when we, you know, get our application ready, like for the cover letter, for the essays, and eventually interview. That exactly highlight that system level approach that school psychologists so uniquely trained for, right? This is like, not to throw other fields under the bus, but that's how we train. System level work, right? We look into the programs and how to deliver the programs in a way that's acceptable by the communities that we are serving. And that's how we need to talk about like program evaluation skills, from the needs assessment to the understanding the progress of the program, to the outcome evaluation, to see these programs working, and like progress monitoring. All the elements within program evaluation is what sets us apart in how we're going to demonstrate the system level thinking in all kind of work that we do. This is really much bigger than just regular research, right? Because we are doing the work to serve the people that we're supposed to be serving. So really highlight that and just really sell how school psychologists are so unique in that area. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is the history with certain sites. So for me, I think that I applied to certain places that my program, University of Houston School Site, has some connections with. I want to say Nationwide was one of them. It has a lot of long history, and I got interviewed there, and it's great. But there are also other sites that not having a lot of history with my program either. So what I'm saying there, for me, from my personal experience, I have like a great variety of sites that have good history with my program, and as well as sites that my program applied but never got an interview, such as CHOP is one of them. So even, I mean, Adrianna, you can talk more about this, but I want to say that just apply to places that you, like Steph said earlier, read through the brochure, read through the handbook, read through all the other clinics that your program will actually have connected with, and understand their full picture and the full stories, and then start writing your application and your interview materials with that. But because I actually applied to more sites that did not have a history with my program, I had to do a lot more research and make sure that what I'm saying in my application, what I'm going to tell them, my story during interview, is connected to what they are working for or serving, things like that. So that's my story. I mean, you can add more if you want.
Yeah, no, I also have a story about sort of history with the program. Michigan State, and a lot of it's a pretty big program. We have a lot of faculty, we have a lot of students. There might be plugged in with specific internship sites. So for example, one of our faculty is the director of the Mid-Michigan Internship Consortium, which is on its way to APA accreditation. Shout out to IMPIC. So that's a site that a lot of our students apply to, because like some of the clinics that are part of IMPIC, we also are plugged into for advanced practicum. So if someone had a really fantastic experience with advanced practicum and they know about another clinic within the system, that you might want to apply. But this isn't fail-safe, right? One of the sort of rumors or little tips in my program is that we're really plugged up with Nationwide Children's Hospital. A lot of our students get interviews there. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, easy, a safety site. They didn't grant me an interview. And that's just part of it. Sometimes, they have considerations that you don't know about behind the scenes. And this is any site, not just Nationwide, but any site. You never know what additional things they're looking for or not looking for. And even though I applied there, my skills and what I was looking for after training wasn't actually a great fit with the site. Mm-hmm. So it's important to not just go by, oh, my university has a relationship with this site, but like Dieu was saying, it's bigger than that, but it's definitely worth considering, right? For sure. Something to think about.
And it's something where it almost is like a rumor. I feel people ask this all the time. It's like, does it really matter where your people from your program have applied? And in some cases, yes. That's not true for every site, right? Some people are going to look at every application equally. Others get so many, or just don't have the time, the team to go through everything, that they have to make some initial cuts, and that's how they have to do it. Have you heard of this university? Do you know anyone who went there? That's a thing that someone has told me as they participated in like a postdoc situation. And so it does happen. I would say it's not every site. So just being thoughtful about a mix, right? If you're going to apply to totally new sites that no one from your program has ever applied to, maybe also consider a couple that they have if they're a good fit, just to have that support, because it's partially a numbers thing, right? It's not necessarily going to be purely merit or whatever. It's also numbers and what's going to be possible for them to get through. Okay, so as you're going through this process, I highly recommend reaching out for feedback and help. And it's like kind of an interesting time in programs, right? You're a fourth or fifth year, usually sixth maybe, and you've gained a lot of independence. You've gained a lot of skills in your health service psychology field. and maybe you're giving more feedback than you're asking for these days in your job. However, going through this process, it is so nice and so important to have some people to bounce things off of, to process through the stress of it. And so on some levels that happens like with your peers. So Adrianna and Dieu and I were on very many late night Zooms to try to get through the confusing parts of the APPIC process. Also, I am lucky and fortunate to have advisors who will give me critiques on my work. And so I sent them my essays before I sent my essays to anyone else and just said like, hey, can you read through this for me? Even though the essays can feel like very personal and all that stuff, I really recommend finding some kind of mentorship, whether that's a person at another place, a former mentor. Not everyone is fortunate to have like super supportive advisors like I do who are willing to give me timely feedback. So just reaching out to different people you know who have been through this process is incredibly important and such a big stress relief, I think, because I was able to send my panicked questions to people a cohort or two above me who have been through this already and feel a little bit calmer and like get talked down off this like anxiety cliff a little bit. So would recommend like talking to people who have been through this. We're going to make our contact information available. You can easily find me on the social medias. I'm happy to chat about this because I think there's, a lot of equity issues in the process of academia and even APPIC. And so to make this information available between people and be normalized asking those questions, even if they feel silly, is really important. And then the other thing, this will probably need to be attached to something else, I guess, but in thinking about cultivating those experiences over time, one thing to remember is that it's not your job, like your preparation for internship is not about, I need to get this huge checklist of activities and I have to do them all. I'm not going to get an internship. And I think sometimes in grad school, we have these like non-real expectations that we kind of absorb of like, man, I really need to be like extra qualified in every single area. When you're in training still, and it's okay not to feel incredibly competent in every single area. So at the same time of like reaching out and finding those opportunities and finding ways to like get towards your goals, when you get to this process of application, it is okay to feel like you're lacking in particular areas. And so from my example is I had a plan to do community mental health for an entire year and get like a lot of individual therapy clients, work with families. COVID interrupted my plan for that. And so because of the jobs I had in grad school, have less experience working with individual therapy clients than many of my peers. I have lots of experience doing other things, but that's an area that I felt distinctly lacking. And so when I started this process, I was like, yikes, what a glaring weakness or something like they're not going to want me because I don't have enough experience. But that just wasn't the case. It was actually a great thing to talk about because they want you to have areas where you want to grow and you're like sure that this is an area you can work on. That's like a focused goal. And so once it was kind of reframed in that way for me of like, oh yeah, this is something that internship will be good for as part of my training rather than like a test at the end of your training. It's not a test. It's a continuation. And so just coming into that with that growth mindset is a little bit more encouraging, I think, than being like, shoot, COVID ruined 3 practicum for me or something. So that don't worry too much about that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's hard when you're thinking of how to prepare for these types of experiences. Like Adrianna was saying before, you want to have all of the experiences to make sure you can focus on your future career, but there's also that line of being too overwhelmed and trying to get all of the training all the time, which is not possible. So thank you for sharing that experience.
In preparing for this complicated APPIC process, there are several people who are going to help you along the way. The mentors we mentioned, your advisors, hopefully your friends, your peers, your colleagues. Hopefully you can depend on them for some community. But one person who really brings support in a way that I feel like is undervalued and undersung, and we should all be celebrating this man, is Greg K. It's probably Greg Kalin, but I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Greg K sends out emails to every single person on this listserv for free about all these details about APPIC sites, like when things get updated, when deadlines move, and just general information, like what to make sure you do on rank day. Like, here are the steps you need to hit. Basically, some of the most crucial information to just make sure you don't miss anything. You want to be on this listserv, and it will be linked in the doobly-doos below. So please check out Greg. Please share our continued value appreciation for all he does, I think, as a side project, to send out these emails to everyone, or he just takes it on all by himself. So everyone's familiar with Greg. We appreciate him. We hope you get to know him via email.
So earlier, Dieu, you mentioned tracking hours, and you mentioned something called time to track. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of us by now probably know about but we have to track our hours and our intervention and assessment and then like other support hours, right? And then most of us, I do believe that we do use this program called Time to Track, because I think that it's recommended by almost all the programs that that we're in. So,
and by APPIC itself.
By APPIC itself, thank you. Yes. And so just go ahead, go to timetotrack.com and go ahead and get it. And the reasons why we talk about time to track today is because during our time doing the application, our year was, this is when the APPIC system linked officially with time to track.
For the first time.
For the very first time during the pandemic. Great timing. Anyway, so then they linked the first time together, and that's the only way that people who are planning to apply will send their hours in and let that link together with APPIC. So I'm gonna go a little bit more, personal experience during that time with Time to Track and APPIC just like merged for the first time. So, and I know that I wasn't the only person either, but let's just say anything that anything that first started to get like working in software and technologies always have some, explosive crisis things happen, and did happen to both of us. So you can talk about yours, but let me share my.
You go first.
Well, anyways, so then I sort of like didn't know. I thought, oh, technology is gonna work out very well, and I kind of waited a little bit. So the first thing I want to like share with you all is that please do not wait until the last minute. Just really organize your hours as soon as possible. Like kind of like thinking maybe summerish, maybe the beginning of fall. Start organizing your hours. Figure out what assessment, figure out what is interventions. Now this is like what you taught me. So then sometimes there are certain activities for assessment that we can actually count for intervention, and there are certain activities within intervention that can actually be counted for assessment. So one of my first things that I could remember would be like the classroom observation, and that can actually count under a psychodiagnostic category, which is under assessment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for me, for my personal story is that I actually focused much more on intervention experience at that time. And so then when I go back and I was like, how come I did not have enough assessment hours? But then again, because it was a pandemic, and of course we have the way to talk about it with our slides that because of the pandemic, our slides were interrupted, and therefore the hours are not reaching the numbers they're looking for. But nevertheless, still like there was not enough. So then I kind of go back and look at all my hours and all the activities that I've done. And this is why I'm talking about like we have to start early. So that I'm starting to reconceptualize the activities and how that may be, rationalized in a way that should be counted in a different category. So then all my classroom observations I've done in the school setting, I decided to count that under assessment and no longer just like for intervention, because I was doing that for an FBA, I was doing it for some like individual counseling for the students. So I moved all that numbers of hours into the assessment. So my number of hours for assessment actually goes up to like 50 hours almost. So then that's how I was able to like increase my number of hours. So there's so many different things that you can do in order to make your categories of assessment and interventions look more reasonable, more palatable for the sites that you're applying for. Another thing that I was going to add is, oh yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I really wanted to add to what you were saying. Yeah. So we all know that we have these categories that we consider psychological services under: assessment, intervention, consultation. It's more fluid than that. So specifically in APPIC, we think about assessment and intervention. Think of it more like a seesaw that has a little bit of wiggle room, right? So Dieu's talking about those observations counting and assessment. Of course they do. If we're going to diagnose or qualify someone for ADHD, you've got to see that behavior in multiple settings. So even if it's to inform an intervention, you can't do the intervention without first knowing what's going on, and you can do that way. And so what Due's talking about is some sites will say, we want you to have 150 intervention hours, but 300 assessment hours. If we think of it more as a little bit of a seesaw, and we're more flexible about how we see some of these observations or diagnostic interviews or intake phone calls, well, what is the activity, but also what is it informing, you know? So I just wanted to clarify on that, and that it's not so much increasing hours, we're not fabricating new hours, but rather rebalancing the seesaw so that the assessment side inches up a little bit and intervention inches down. Sorry to interrupt. Okay.
Oh, that's okay. And yeah, exactly. Just to make sure that, you know, the number of hours are reflected exactly what you do. Another thing that I was going to add to you is thinking about working like I said earlier, program evaluation. That's also counted as well. So make sure that's counted, and that's also counted under intervention. So just remember that if you do have those kind of work, like being counted under program evaluation. And another thing that sometimes we do this a lot for us, like we like to work with community, uplifting community and whatnot. There's something called the like outreach information, and that can be actually counted under intervention as well. So look into that and see who's the people who are supervising you. And when you do have a licensed psychologist who are informed about what you do and are you doing with them, those are information that you can think about whether you can count those hours and you can count those hours under interventions. So look into that category as well. And very last thing that had to do with the other categories, and that was like really messed me up so much when I was like organizing my own hours. And I was like having a bunch of hours, a bunch of activities under other psychological intervention. And when I was like ready to get submitted to my DCT to kind of look over, not even approval yet. And then for some reason, all the other psychological intervention hours were not counted in the AAPI view. And I was like, what is going on? Which was like really scary because like there was a lot during that time. And then I had to call up Time to Track and ask them like what's going on and things like that. And they explained to me that for some reason, those other kind of like in the category of other hours don't get counted for my AAPI report. So just to let you know that, you know, maybe they changed that by the time you're applying, but making sure that you kind of look over it and then making sure that you actually move them to the right category and not the other. Avoid at all costs, basically.
Yes, and I'm going to piggyback off of, so well before that AAPI Time to Track snafu that happened with Dieu, my program's DCT, who's phenomenal, shout out to Michigan State's faculty, advised us that programs want to see more specificity than that anyway. So just the other category in general, they kind of see that and they're like, well, what is that? Because you don't get to go in and write. And so this leads me to the fact that Time to Track isn't really well designed for school psych students. So you can go in and create your own categories and put different school psych activities where they might fit better. And that way you're not ending up with all these school psych specific things collected in other that really have more clinical merit and are specific intervention or assessment activities. So like you said, avoid other at all costs.
Yeah, exactly. Just avoid others. Just make it, like Adrianna was saying, as clear as possible. Because like it's some way, you know, because like there's not enough space within the application process to really highlight all the great work that you do. So just try to figure out ways to capture that somewhere. And I do know that because there's just so many things that actually we can do with Time to Track and get used to it. So this is why we want to start early. And there are ways that we can use like certain custom made options that we can like write in or create categories for to capture the work that we do. Like I know for sure that the link that we can like link down below, there's a way we can add like assessment instruments specifically, because there are ones that they have already set for a Time to Track may not have the one that we do. So make sure that we can add them, create our own custom labels, and we can even write in. For instance, for me, I have to do a lot of like, I get to do a lot of like PMT paramedic training opportunities with international populations. And I'm pretty sure Time to Track does not have that category pre-made, right? So I create my own label for that intervention opportunities with supervision, of course, and to write that in there is like providing PMT to international population in Vietnam, to making sure that captures. So as they go through my application to review, they know that, oh wow, look at all this work that this applicant has done. Got to highlight all the amazingness that you have. But like I said, just making sure that, start early, think clearly about what you want, be specific, talk with your advisor, talk with your DCT, start all this process early, don't wait till last minute. And hopefully this year, the linking between APPIC and time to track is smoother, much better, no more scares like last year. We got this. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your time to track experiences. I just started using time to track right before this past spring semester, so that's after 1.5 years of using a very detailed Excel sheet to track my hours. But I kind of just set aside a few chunks of time to just kind of transfer everything over, and it has made my life a lot easier, especially knowing that it has, I'll say, fully integrated into that APPIC process, and hopefully all of the challenges you all experienced, hopefully that's kind of ironed out by the time the rest of us are using it. But thank you for sharing that. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences in preparing for the APPIC process, even if it's really early. But you can find all of those links in the description below, and you can watch out for our next video. Bye.